Emotionally, it did not make me happy. The math is making sense. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Thank you, August and September, for carrying the tea, and it's going to be spicy. I'm trying my best. New data alert on an off tangent, off yapping. It's clicking. Hi friends, I hope you guys are all doing mentally, physically, and emotionally well. Today I have for you all a quarterly reading statistics video. So yes, grab yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a cup of your favorite beverage, because we're gonna get nitty gritty on all the numbers up in here between July and September. So I have accumulated, gobbled up all the data between July and September, and I have analyzed them and put together a presentation for you all to give you guys a good perspective on what I've been reading, my overall reading trend, my reading averages, and also the kind of books that I'm reading. And without any further ado, let's head right onto the very first piece of data, which is how many books did I read in quarter three. Now in quarter three, I read a total of 37 books, which is slightly higher than the numbers total of the books I read in quarter one, and also slightly higher than the total numbers of books I read in quarter two. And also, as you guys can see, I did update my graphics a little bit to fit more into a fall vibe theme. I think this is something I'm going to continue doing forward for every quarter. I'm going to switch things up so I personally don't get bored and it'll fit more with the season. So my goal for this video is to try to be concise and to the point and make it a sweet, simple video. So I'm going to head on right over to the breakdown of the numbers of books I read per month in quarter three. So as you can see, July is really carrying the amount of books I read in quarter three with around 15 books. That's a little bit less than half. I'm thinking maybe like 40% of the total for all of quarter three. So a little bit surprising in terms of why did I read so many books in July. I don't really recall what happened in July and why I read so many books, but let's continue on with my data and statistics and see if we can piece together some information on this. So what does this mean in terms of the numbers of pages I read for quarter three? That meant that I read around 11,182 pages total for quarter three, which is actually pretty comparable to my number in quarter two. Very on par, very average, and I'm looking and I'm expecting my average amount of pages read for every quarter to be around 10,000 to 11,000, which ultimately means that every year I should come out to around 42,000 pages total. So I'm definitely going to put a bookmark into this little piece of reading data I'm expecting, and then I'm going to see if that's actually true when we do our full year wrap up. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at the pages breakdown for quarter three, August is leading at around 4,100 pages, whereas July and September were closer to the 3,500 pages mark. Now, if you remember from the second slide that I show you all, July was actually the highest amount of books read, but surprisingly, we see that even though July had the most books read, it's actually the least amount of pages read. I love that somehow we have like the two flipping opposite, because August had the least amount of books read, but then it has the most amount of pages read, coming in around 4,100 pages. So I love the duality of it. It's very interesting. I love seeing this data. Personally, I don't think I would have been as shocked if only one of the pieces of data was true. And of course, I don't really recall all the books that I read both in August and July on top of my head, but I will be going into a brief overview of all the books I read, quickly going over all of them in a hot second. But before we do that, let's look at the pages breakdown per day and see if I have any slack and off days, as I mentioned in the previous quarter. So for my reading spread for quarter three, I don't really see as many break dips that I have mentioned in quarter one and quarter two reading statistics, or rather I do, but they're not as obvious. Some good examples of potentially where I took my short break would be the 13th, the 22nd, and the 23rd. But since I didn't really read that much in that span, the dip is a lot less noticeable, so I don't think of it as much as a break, as just a little bit of a lull, or maybe those are the weekend days, so I have a lot more things I'm doing and working on, so I couldn't read as much. Something that is a lot more interesting in quarter three is the fact that I front-loaded a lot of my reading. As you guys can see on the screen, the first third of the month is where I did a lot of the bulk reading, averaging a lot higher than the rest of the month. I'm sure on the screen somewhere I would have given you guys the average for the first third and the rest of the month. Alright, now let's do a quick overview of all the books I read for every single month, just to kind of get a good idea about why the number lies where they are. I'm not going to go into detail about any of the books I read. I'm just gonna have them on the screen for you guys to see, and then you guys can determine it yourself. And it's kind of like a reminder for me as I'm talking through my thoughts and allow me to recognize like, oh, why was July like this? Why was August like this, right? And of course, if you guys wanted to hear me talk about any books in more details, definitely check out the monthly wrap up. And now without any further ado, let's head right on to July. July, as I said, we had a lot of books, so it had to be split up into 2 screens. I couldn't even fit it into 1 screen if I wanted to. Now, here's what I mentioned about being reminded as to what my reading month is like by seeing all these books on the screen. Even though all these books just total to be 2/3 of everything I read in July, I can clearly see why July had a lot of books read, but the numbers of pages read is a lot lower. As you guys can just count on the screen, 8 of the books being displayed is considered a manga, webcomic, or manhwa. Now, with more graphic novel-based books, the volumes and the book themselves tend to be a lot shorter than traditional novels. Traditional novels, I want to say, average around 300 to 350, whereas manhwa, mangas, webcomic, etc. are generally between 200 to 250 pages for the average length. Now, all that combined, that basically means that there's almost a 100-page discrepancy between novels and more graphic-based books. So just doing some quick math with the 8 graphic novels that we see on the screen here, we are missing about 800 pages because again, graphic books are generally 100 pages shorter than traditional novels. So numbers-wise, it's making sense, you know, it's clicking. So that's the analysis and understanding I have as to why July has so many books read, but also the least amount of pages read. Now that aside, I have to highlight the book that I liked the least in July, which is There Is No Ethan. And then moving on to the next slide, I have yet another manhwa on the list, so make it 900 pages. That is technically missing in comparison to its equivalent amount of novels. So 900 pages, the math is mathing, the math is making sense to me now, all right? Now, July was a very solid reading month. I believe almost every single book had a 4 or higher rating, except for 1 or 2 special cases. So it was really hard for me to really pick out what was going to be my favorite read of the month, but it ended up being The Wicked King because I could remember the plot points. It was a really enticing sequel to the first book where I wasn't 100% sure if I really liked the series. I felt like Holly Black was able to really build the characters, gave the characters a lot more depth, and as a result, I just ended up remembering a lot more about The Wicked King and everything that has happened. And also, it's such a true enemies to lovers moment that it was just so fresh in my mind, and therefore I had to pick it as my favorite read for July. That's not to say the other reads weren't good or even as good. It's just that once I factoring in all this information, The Wicked King was the one that stood out to me the most, and that's what I ended up deciding on, especially 3 months afterwards. If I could really recall the major plot point events from that book, I feel like it deserves to be a highlighted book for the month. So what about August? Let's talk about August, all right? August was my sci-fi era. It was when I started dabbling into sci-fi books and also started calculating video games as books. Upon seeing and reflecting on all the information that you guys see on the screen right here, I now understand why August technically is the most amount of pages read for the least amount of books, because I added a video game section into it, and a video game counts as a book, but the gameplay is so long that it really dragged the number of pages up, even though I only have it categorized as one game or one section of a game. So definitely that is what skewed my reading data. It's actually not accurate, or is it? I don't know. The thing with video games once you add it in is that sometimes they release content in a patch, and because I'm just catching up on this game, I'm consuming what they would consider like 2 or 3 months long worth of content in one sitting, and as a result, some of the equivalent pages that I read in one sitting would come out to be 900 pages, which is probably what skewed the reading data and the reading trend for August. And I think it's going to continue to do that until I catch up with the current story and things will be broken down more in around the 400-page amount, because that's what I'm thinking when I'm looking back at the most recent content that I played. And I would have to say it's closer to 400 pages. So definitely until I catch up to the latest patch of Honkai Star Rail, we are going to see some skewed data between the amount of books I read versus the number of pages I read. And I think you're going to also see this information reflected in the next coming slides. So yes, my reading data for both July and August were skewed in the opposite direction, which caused this opposite sides of a coin kind of deal, but it's whatever. It's just nice to have and nice to see, and that's why I have these slides here, so you guys can really narrow down and nitpick and really see why the reading data is what it is. As for my favorite book for the month of August, it has to be Just for the Summer. Now, almost every single book here was enjoyable in a lot of different sense, and I had a really hard time picking what book stood out to me, but I had to go with Just for the Summer because of the depth of all the characters and the depth of the story. On the other side of this, because all the books were so good, it was really hard to pinpoint which one was going to be my least favorite, but I had to go with Pachinko because while Pachinko made me think and gave a lot of food for thought, it wasn't exactly an enjoyable read. It was a lot of suffering and it was very depressing, and I think that's why it's my least favorite read in terms of emotionally. All right, emotionally it did not make me happy. I thought it was a very thought-provoking book, and it gave a lot of historical background to what Koreans had to face during World War II, and then also the racism between Koreans and Japanese people, but it was not a fun read. It was an enlightening read, it was not a fun read, and therefore it was put as my least favorite book because I really enjoyed all the other books as I'm reading it. They might not be the strongest plot-wise, but at the very least, I enjoyed reading them. So unfortunately, Pachinko will take the title as my least favorite book for August. As for September, I'm not gonna go into any detail about this because I had an hour-long video of me using my brain critically thinking about all these books, and you can really get a good idea as to where I kind of ranked all the books almost, because I really talked about my enjoyment, what I thought about the book critically, and how all of that extract into what I gave the rating as. For my most favorite book for the month of September, it had to be Villains Are Destined to Die Season 4 because that's when the plot and the climax hit. Season 4 is basically, if you think about like a long running series, this is where the climax is. This is where everything you built up to is here, and they just left us on a cliffhanger. So it is by default my most favorite just because of all the emotion and the roller coaster I sat through, and I'm just expecting and wanting more in the next coming season or in the next coming book. Hopefully that section was quick and concise. I don't know what editing Mimi is going to do with all of that information, but she is going to do what she's going to do. And let's talk about my average star rating for quarter 3. Quarter 3, I had an average star rating of 4.18 stars. This is not really shocking news or anything to me. I feel like on average, I really do give most books 4 stars, but I can't wait to see you guys in my quarter 4 statistics because I think I'm gonna be a little bit spicy. I know what I'm reading right now. I know what I've been reading recently, and it's going to be spicy, all right? But yeah, for my average star rating, this is kind of what I expected. Most books for me on the enjoyment scale generally sits around a 4. It's very hard for me to dip lower than a 3, and it's something I want to reflect on before 2025. I find that I just rate them 4s if I enjoy them, which I'm thinking I might want to change that in the coming months in 2025. I haven't exactly decided what I'm going to do yet, but I've started implementing it on quarter 4 reading statistics, so we're about to see some more spicy ratings coming up. Now, as I mentioned, because of the way I rate my books, most of my books fall on the 4-star line, and as you guys can see on the screen clearly, almost all the books that I have rated are 4 or higher, with only 6 books out of 37 books being below a 4-star. Again, this is me seeing the data and allowing me to reflect on my rating scale and how I should rate them going forward. Okay, so that was a slight tangent. We'll see how editing Mimi deals with it. And now let's talk about everything that's related to pages read. Now for quarter 3, the average length of a book that I read is approximately 294 pages, and on the same trail as what we were talking about earlier in terms of video games being included as books and then webcomic, manhwa, mangas being included as books, we get to really see that in the next couple of slides, with the very first one being, what is the longest book that I read? Now, the longest book that I read technically is a video game, and it is Honkai Star Rail, both the tutorial and the first world, which comes out at approximately 960 pages. Don't worry though, because I did include a runner-up for the longest book that I read in quarter 3, and the runner-up for the longest book that I read in quarter 3 is going to be The Popular War, coming in at 530 pages. Now back to the skewed data I was talking about earlier. The shortest book I read for quarter 3 is a one-shot featuring Fate Grand Order Servant Hama, and this came in at 33 43 pages. It is a one-shot manga, so it's just basically one chapter featuring a character in a video game. Also, new data alert, because I've really been enjoying audiobooks, therefore I'm gonna have to add the longest audiobook I read in quarter 3. And the crown goes to Powerless, coming in at 17 hours and 26 minutes. To be fair though, I do listen to majority of my audiobooks on at least 1.5 times speed, all the way up to 2 times speed. So let's quickly take a look about the book length breakdown that we have. And as you guys can see on the screen, majority of the books that I read for quarter 3 were below 300, which makes sense since the average book length is 294 pages. Let's move away from anything length related and let's talk about the formats. I literally read the wrong statistics for this, so here's me doing a voiceover to let you guys know exactly what the reading format breakdown is. So for my reading format, digital is dominating at 48.6%. Then afterwards, we have physical coming in at 27% and audio coming in at a comparable 24.3%. I am expecting this piece of data to change in the next coming months because I am really starting to vibe with audiobooks, specifically in the month of November. I believe for November alone, everything I have read so far in November has been audiobooks. So I'm really excited to see this data morphs and change and grow in quarter 4. Diving deeper into the formats, I have broken it down into types of reading that I do, whether they are physical like paperback, ebook, audiobook, mangas and manhwas, or video games. So this gives you a better perspective on where things fall. So for video games, they are always digital, paperback is physical. Now mangas and manhwa can both be physical or digital, and ebooks will fall under the digital category. And then last but not least, audiobook will fall under the audio category. So unfortunately, the audio format is being carried by only audiobooks. So all things considering, audiobook is holding its ground in my statistical data. Of course, we can't talk about statistical data without my favorite piece of data of all time, which is how much money I saved for quarter 3. And this quarter, I saved a whopping total of $316. Yes, $316. That is about $10 less than quarter 1 and quarter 2 combined. I'm really starting to get into the groove of using Libby, Hoopla, and all the different resources I have at hand to make it so that I don't need to go out and buy all these books. Though I do spoil myself sometimes every now and then, I do think this is a huge achievement and a huge accomplishment, and I'm super proud of myself for leveraging and using my local resources and things that are available to me for free. In terms of the breakdown throughout the months, you guys can see clearly July is being carried by August and September. Even though it had the most amount of books read, it's not carrying its weight in terms of how much money I saved when I use my local library resources. August, on the other hand, once again, my hero, coming in with the least amount of books read, but still saving me at $127. Thank you. Thank you, August and September, for carrying the team. To give you guys a little bit more context about how I saved so much money, let's talk about the acquisition methods, meaning how did I get these books? So as you guys can see on the screen, 42% of the books were purchased by me, but that means the rest, close to 60%, were free. Now I broke free into 3 general patterns. So free meaning it's literally free, such as a video game that is free for you to install and play, or books that I got from the free little library. And then second are library loans. So books that I got from the library, from Hoopla, from Libby. And last but not least are subscriptions. Honestly, I have said the word subscription too many times to say correctly anymore. So I'm gonna move on to the next piece of data. Okay, maybe I'm not gonna move on to the next piece of data because I just took a look about what it is. And before we start, place your bets on what's going to be my top 3 genres and what's going to be my top 3 categories. But honestly, I think you guys might have a hard time with categories. I kind of explained it in my quarter 1 and quarter 2 reading statistics, but I am going to be looking for your help on that at the end of the video. So maybe don't guess on the categories, just guess on what my top 3 genres instead. All right, did everyone put in their guesses for what my top 3 genre is going to be yet? Because now I'm gonna tell you guys what the first one is. Romance. Yes, I'm sure most of you guys will get this right just because of what kind of reader I am. I am a very heavy romance reader. So it is going to have to be romance taking in the lead once again. So the harder guesses is definitely the second and the third top ranking genre that I read. And coming in second is going to have to be historical. Yes, once again, historical is coming in again at second to claim its spot as a permanent second place in my top genre. In quarter one and quarter two, we also saw that historical was ranked in top three. And then I am a little bit surprised in quarter three for sure, because I didn't think I read as many mangas and manhwas that were set in historical settings. But then I remember some more literary picks that I read, which is set in history and it talks about history. And therefore, I set the genre as historical. So it makes sense. Some good examples you guys can see on the screen and on top of my head is Clytemnestra, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and Pachinko. Those three are what's on my mind at the forefront when I think of historical, but also not manhwa and manga related. And I think that's why it was able to keep its ground as being one of the top three most read genres. So the genre that came in third for quarter three is going to have to be mystery. I categorize things by myself. I don't refer to what books categorize themselves as. I categorize them with how I'm feeling and what my thought process are for the books after I finish reading them. And for me, what I consider as a mystery might not be mysterious or a mystery book to you. Mystery books for me just has me questioning about the motive, the action, the plot, and anything that's going to occur in it. And a lot of the books that I read in quarter three definitely gave a lot of that vibe to me. So I definitely did categorize some books that might not be considered as mysterious books in the common context. As you guys can see on the screen, some books that I categorize as mystery that might not be what you would commonly expect as mysterious is The Murderbot Diaries. I found the world to be mysterious, the intentions and the plot to be mysterious. So I kind of said it there. You don't really know much about the world. Then we have There Is No Ethan. There's a lot of psychological aspect as to There Is No Ethan, as to trying to figure out Ethan Schumann's motive in tricking all of these women. And then we have Honkai Star Rail, which we know nothing about at all, which I found to be mysterious in that aspect. It might not be what people would mark it as mysterious, but these are just things that I marked as such as I was reading. Definitely a little bit iffy here and there. There are some moments where I reflect back and I was like, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I don't like to mess with the stats, so I do not go back and change it. So before we get into the last section of the reading statistics, I wanted to highlight some books that I really enjoyed in quarter three. These books are books that I had a good time reading, or that allowed me to think really critically and analyze things that are happening in my life and or my own thought process and how I think of things. A really good example of this is Clytemnestra. It's on here even though I did not give it a particularly high rating, because it allowed me to really think about what I liked in a mythical retelling. And because of that, I have to put it on here. It's a notable, worthy mention. As much as I didn't like how it was executed, I really liked the fact that it allowed me to really analyze about why I felt certain ways throughout the book. Of course, then we just have books that I just felt like really stood out to me and are books that I would recommend people, such as The Murderbot Diaries, Just for the Summer, and Villains Are Destined to Die. And then we have some more literary picks that made my brain think a little bit more about what's happening in our society and why these books are important, such as The Diary of a Young Girl and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And finally, we are at the final stretch of this video, which is the top categories I read in quarter three. Again, categories is kind of iffy, and I'll actually show you guys all the categories I have and ask you guys for some help on how I should update and change it. But before we do all of that, let's talk about the rank one category for quarter three. Coming in first is going to be friendship. I really felt like quarter three is all about friendship. I read a lot about friendship and growth, whether they're robots, high schoolers, or full-blown adults. A lot of the books I read really dealt with themes of friendship and being there for one another. So I'm not super surprised that friendship is in the lead. Now, the next top category I read in quarter three is going to be LGBTQ+, and a lot of this is thanks to Blue Flag. Blue Flag is a Japanese manga that I felt depict the lives and representation of LGBTQ so beautifully. The execution and the topics that were discussed surrounding friendship, misogyny, and also the LGBTQ community was so well done and so well handled that it just made for a very heartfelt, warming book, but also thought thought-provoking in how our society and how the world works, and just some common scenarios that high schoolers face as they're growing up and growing older. So a lot of coming of age themes surrounding LGBTQ, and I really enjoyed it, but I will have to say it is the reason why LGBTQ representation did get padded in terms of categories. And then last but not least, we have politics as our third most read category in Q3. So for me, again, I do all these categorization and genre picking after I finish reading the book and not necessarily reference anything on Goodreads or any other sites. I tag it as how I feel at the time when I'm reading this. So when I tag things about politics, they aren't necessarily like politics heavy driven books, but I feel like politics has a background play into the way the plot moves and how things are being told. So really obvious examples would be 1984 and A Diary of a Young Girl. Politics is heavy in the background for those, whereas in The Poppy War, I categorize it as politics because policies and politics is what really got the story moving, happening, and all the events to occur because of what's happening in the background politically, right? So those are kind of like examples of how I stretch out what politics means to me. It might not be 100 accurate to what you might put it as, but that's just how I view these books. And that about wraps up everything you need to know statistically wise for my Q3 reading data. Now let's talk about the things I alluded to, which is the categories that I have for my reading. As you guys can see on the screen, I have a lot on the screen right now, and they can range from tropes to genres to themes of the books and to point of the books. So it's really hard for me to really know what to call this as such. That's why it's such a broad term categories. And also I really don't think a lot of it is necessary. Now what I mean by this is that there's so many that's like very, very specific, and then there are some that just aren't as specific. I think what I want to keep in terms of categories are things that are relevant to the themes and the point of the books, such as race, politics, coming of age, friendships, etc. And I really don't know if I should keep tropes in general because I feel like it just falls under romance. Like all of these that you are seeing on the screen and I have highlighted for you here, all are generally romance. Maybe I'll just keep some that are morally gray, intense, and or like group more categories together because I feel like there's too many specific ones and I don't think it'll ever compete with each other enough to rank anywhere on my reading list. So definitely let me know down in the comment section anything you guys can recommend, what I do to clean up this category list because it's something that I really want to improve in 2025. I don't think this is what I'm going to be sticking with. We have a lot of like very like serious themes, and then we have tropes on romance book, and I don't really know what I want to do with that because as someone who heavily reads romance, these don't even really come into play in terms of being able to get into the rankings. Well, maybe except for Marriage of Convenience because that did end up as I believe the third ranking in Q1 and Q2 reading statistics. So there's also that problem. You guys know what I'm saying? Or maybe I'm just thinking too much. I don't know. Just let me know. And with that, I think I should wrap up this video. I hope it is not disgustingly long. I'm really hoping that it's sub 30 minutes, but we will have to see. And as for the pieces of data that you guys see, let me know if you guys like any specific piece of data or if you want to see something more specific that I should log. Definitely let me know as well because I'm always looking for more things to log on my spreadsheet because I get so much of an adrenaline rush just seeing the numbers populate and update and all that good things all related to Excel. Maybe I'm just a little bit of an Excel nerd. All right, I'm gonna stop myself here before I go on another ridiculous 5-minute tangent and then editing Mimi is gonna have to figure it out. So without any further ado, thank you so much for watching my video and thank you so much for watching and taking a look at all my reading data trends. And if you guys enjoy this video and enjoy this content, definitely make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys hopefully next week for another video. Bye!